All right, in our second video, we're going to look at a couple of different issues with crime and deviance. First, we're going to think about the problem of obedience, something we don't often consider. When is conformity a problem? And then we're going to look at different types of crime and what crime is specifically as a kind of deviance. So we often don't think of obeying rules and commands as being a source of uh, of a problem in society. But obedience itself can be a problem when the structures of society become so detached from the people that obedience to the rules and the norms means hurting and even killing people. One of the most famous examples of this, but there are many throughout history, is the Nazi Party, in which many um, soldiers and Germans exterminated Jews, gays, other East Europeans, um, murdered them, rounded them up, treated them. And when the war was over and they were brought before the Nuremberg court, many offered what's now known as the Nuremberg defense. The Nuremberg defense was simply one of obedience. Many soldiers said simply that I was just following orders. In an interesting follow-up study that would today be considered very unethical, Stanley Milgram had a number of testers come into a laboratory, and they were told that they were to administer shocks to another person in the experiment called the learner, and they were the teacher. And they were told that this was an exercise in negative feedback on learning. If you get the answer wrong and you're shocked by like a little electric device, does that increase learning? In fact, the experiment was to see how far people would go in giving these shocks to people. Because the person on the other side of the screen who was supposedly getting them wasn't really getting anything at all. They were just acting like it, and they were going, ow, ow. You can watch videos of this. It's very fascinating. What he found was that over 60% of the people who came into his experiment were willing to go up to the highest level of pain tolerance, up to the point where the person on the other side of the screen was quiet, as in they had either passed out or worse. The reason people would often do this is they would say they were worried, but there was a person in a white lab coat with a clipboard behind them who kind of looked like a scientist and told them, don't worry, go ahead. It'll be my responsibility. You just have to continue with the experiment. So conformity to authority can often be a source of problems in our society. We see this today in things like police unions and training, where most of the sensitivity and complexity training is often thrown out the window when police officers actually go on duty and they're trained by older officers who tell them, quote unquote, how things really are. Here they're conforming to the group around them. So conformity to power structures can also create problems. All right, so what makes something a crime as opposed to just general deviant behavior? You're farting in the elevator and cussing at your mother. As we learned in our norms section, crimes and laws are norms that are formally sanctioned by the state. They are written out, and they're often backed up by the power of the state. That means you can be arrested by police, tried by state-funded courts, and either killed in state-funded executions or housed in state-funded jails. One of the things we want to think about is, why are some things made criminal and why are others just left as everyday deviance? Why is something like marijuana today still a criminal act even though it's not seen as that deviant? How does the system function differently for different groups? Are crimes always worse than informal norms, informal deviance? Is smoking weed always going to be worse than cheating on someone? We'll come back to these questions a little later, and certainly in our class discussion, but really think about, very historically and practically, why do certain things become crimes? We've seen in previous videos that having relations with animals in some states is not actually a crime. It's certainly a very strong norm. Most people won't talk to you if you do that, but it's not actually criminal behavior. Why not? Who gets to say what becomes a crime and what doesn't? Equally important are different types of crime, and which of these are more serious? Sociologists typically make distinction between what we call street crimes or index crimes, which is misspelled here. These are your everyday interperson crimes: theft, assault, murder, larceny. I don't even know what larceny is. Everyday street level crimes. We also have white collar crimes. These are committed, the distinction here is between people who wear blue collars and white collars. This goes back to people who used to work in factories. Those who worked on the factory floor would wear denim, or the same stuff your jeans are made of. Their shirts were made of denim because it's more rugged and you could throw it in the wash and bleach it and that sort of thing. And so they were known as blue collar workers. But the people who worked up in the offices and oversaw them, they wore suits every day and they wore white shirts with their suits. So those were known as white collar jobs. So white collar jobs or crimes are those committed by people who work in offices. So this is your fraud, your embezzlement, your identity theft. Well, that was really more of a cybercrime, but they can go together. So these are kind of office job crimes. Selling someone a mortgage who shouldn't have it, tricking someone into selling their house. They were talking about this on the radio this morning. These are more white-collar type crimes. Cybercrimes are an increasingly important form of crime. Many of us at some point in our lives will have our information hacked and stolen from us. Many of us probably have our social security or credit card information just floating out there in vast data banks that house these informations and are sold through criminal networks in what's called the dark web. Many of us probably have a lot more information, perhaps video out there than we would like people to. And then we have hate crimes. Hate crimes are those that are motivated by prejudice towards a minority group. This is a technical category in many states which can be sanctioned with greater jail time and greater punishment. It's interesting to look up which states have hate crime laws. These have recently come to the forefront in light of racially motivated crimes in Georgia against Ahmaud Arbery, and other hate crimes against Jewish folks in synagogues. What's interesting to think of here is what kind of crime is worse here? Is white-collar crime, stuff that these guys in offices do, worse than street crime, being held up with a gun? It's an interesting question. Who is actually policed and stopped? Who gets arrested for crimes? If we think about something like the financial crisis of 2008, how many people were actually prosecuted for the fraudulent activity that led to the downfall of the entire global economy? To date, it's not actually zero, it's one. One person has been. But by and large, white-collar crimes aren't treated as seriously. They're often brought up in civil court, not in criminal court. It means they can be sued, but it doesn't turn into a felon. So this begs the question is, why are street crimes treated more serious or more important, even though if you think about what these fraudulent activities can do, you can deprive people of their entire life savings, of their retirement, of their plan for the future, of the small amount of wealth they might have in a house. Why is that considered more serious than pointing a gun at someone or robbing a small store? Why do we treat crimes of the poor as more important, more worthy of arrest than crimes of the wealthy and powerful?